Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives jobs, incomes, debts, our own, our children's. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I'm going to continue today with a program that we have been developing over the last several months, in which basic issues that you're concerned about, that you write to us about, become the subject for an entire program. And today, that subject is the relationship between modern socialism on the one hand and the movement to create worker co-ops on the other. The relationship between these two has become very intimate, let's call it, very close. And I want to explain why and what the implications of that are. First, socialism has been going through, particularly over the last 30 to 40 years, an intense period of self-criticism and transformation. And that's as it should be. A healthy movement, a healthy system, is one that questions itself and changes itself when it finds flaws, failures, and so forth. Every system has strengths and weaknesses. It is healthy to identify the latter, for sure, and do something about them. And that's what socialism has been doing. And socialism identified one of its weaknesses as being an overconcentration of power in the hands of a state apparatus. And it has asked itself, this movement of socialism, what went wrong there? How do you deal with that problem? Are there forms of socialism that can make sure, in some basic way, not to produce too much power in the hands of too few people in a state apparatus? And worker co-ops, as I will show, is a way to do that. But before I go on, I want to contrast a socialism that is going through self-criticism with a global capitalism that is not doing that. And therein lies a big story. When capitalism is in a declining phase, which I believe it currently is, it is perhaps not surprising that its chief spokesmen and women are afraid to confront their failures and flaws, afraid of self-criticism, because their system, they hope, will somehow last longer if they pretend it doesn't have flaws and failures. Socialism, for a whole host of historical reasons, does not have that luxury, and that's a good thing for the development of socialism. So where does the critique go? It goes as follows. Socialism focused on what we might call the macro level of society, the big picture. And in that process, it decided that the problems of capitalism that socialism would remedy were the following two basic ones. Number one, by leaving factories, stores, farms, offices in the hands of a few people, the owners of businesses, the boards of directors of big corporations, a tiny minority of our people, what would happen is that the economic system would be controlled by them for their own benefit, so that the people at the top would become the most wealthy, which they kind of have, and the most powerful, which they kind of have. And so the socialists reasoned that the way to deal with this problem was to take the property in means of production, factories, offices, and all of that, and transfer it from private individuals enriching themselves because of their positions, and give it instead to the state to manage these properties, these productive properties, in the interest of the whole society, hence the very name, socialism. And the second thing socialism would do would stop using markets as the way to distribute things. And the reasoning of socialists there was always very simple. Markets allocate things that are produced or resources to the people with the most money. And for socialists, this made no sense at all, since the rich at the top, who own everything, are the ones with the most money. So once again, the system benefits them because they're in a position in markets to dominate. just like they are in a position everywhere else because they own the means of production, once again, to dominate. So the socialists said, let's not have markets, let's have the government distribute goods and services and resources in a democratic way rather than using the market, which favors the rich. And socialists therefore focused this way. We're going to take the property and means of production from the private owners and make them state property, and we're going to stop markets from distributing things and have government planning do it. That was their idea. So what happened in the self-criticism of socialism was to ask the question, was there something missing? Was there something wrong in how that kind of socialism, which was successful in economic development, but was unsuccessful in the larger social questions of civil liberties, civil rights, cultural freedom, and so on? And they came up with an answer. Yes. The problem, these self-critical socialists have said to themselves and others, is this: that socialism addressed who owned the property, and socialism addressed how things got distributed. But what socialisms didn't address in the 20th century, at least not in any systematic way, neither in Russia, nor in China, nor in the other societies that have experimented with socialism, what they didn't do was transform the workplace, the little workshop, the factory, the office, the store, the farm. They didn't understand that if socialism is going to be established, you don't just transform who owns the property, and you don't just transform markets into planning for all the reasons socialists give, but you also have to transform the workplace, the place where people spend all of their creative time, or at least a large part of it, for their entire adult lives, 5 days a week, all the rest of it, the workplace. And if you don't transform the workplace, wow, you may set in motion a conflict, a contradiction between the big changes you've made in property and markets and the unchanged workplace, and it may allow for that workplace unchanged to undo the changes you made at the higher level, and there's evidence in Russia and China that precisely that happened. Well, what then is the difference between a socialized workplace and the capitalist workplace we inherit? People in capitalism feel oppressed, exhausted, abused, misunderstood, mistreated, exploited. The language we have for that experience is immense because the experience is virtually universal. The whole idea of worker co-op is to change that, to make the workplace democratic. That's right, to install democracy in the workplace where it has been excluded for the entire history of capitalism. It's as if the idea that being in a place where the decisions that impact you are decisions you have the right to participate in, and that's what democracy means, it is as if that right, that commitment, which applies to where we live, somehow shouldn't apply to where we work. And the whole notion of worker co-ops runs against that. Yes, it should apply. In fact, if you don't have democracy at the workplace, you don't have it where most adults spend most of their lives, and therefore you are not a democratic society unless and until you include the workplace in where democracy ought to be installed. And indeed, it's an old dream of working people, the majority, to have democracy in the workplace. That's why slogans like freedom and democracy and liberty got going, because people wanted something not just outside of the workplace. They wanted liberty and freedom and democracy in it because they spend so much. And people have been organizing worker co-ops for centuries. It's all over history if you know to look for. So modern socialism, the one that emerges from the self-criticism of the 20th century, is a 21st century socialism that puts first and foremost the transformation of the workplace finally to bring democracy to that central part of our modern life. Transforming your workplace from a place where you did the work somebody else told you to do and lived with the results of what somebody else decided, but transforming it into a place where you are part of the decision-making apparatus, where you participate in designing and directing and not just performing like a trained SEAL. This is something that will transform people's lives. They will understand that. It will be a socialism that's immediate about our lives on a daily basis, not something done far away in some government office that's abstract in terms of how it functions. You, the working person, the majority, will be at the core of such a concept of socialism. It also makes socialism something that is democratic at the base. The power of the people will be focused on, embodied in the fact that the people own the wealth, the productive wealth of society. That's what's hampered democracies so far. You can have all the voting and everybody voting that you want, but if the power of money is concentrated in a tiny minority, they corrupt that. They will have influence based on their wealth and economic position that undermines the whole point and purpose of political democracy. What the worker co-op does is democratize the power and the wealth by putting it in the hands of working people. If you want the economy to work for the people, you got to put them in charge. If you want democracy to be genuine and not just a formality of voting, you've got to put the people in charge, and they have to be in charge of the economy. Otherwise, the minority that in capitalism controls the economy will also pervert the democracy. In office, here's some of the things a Socialist Party could do. And indeed, the way is being shown by the Labour Party in England. One of the first things the Labour Party is committed to do, and a Socialist Party in America would do the same, is to make a law called the right of first refusal. No company can leave the country, sell itself to another one, go public with stocks, or simply cease to exist without first giving its own workers the right of first refusal. That is, the workers can buy the company from whoever owns it now and convert it into a worker co-op. And if you're wondering where the workers would get the money to do that, the government, with a socialist leadership, would lend them the money, which is exactly what Mr. Corbyn and the Labour Party in England are proposing to do. A new socialism connected to and embracing worker co-ops as the transition from capitalism to a better system is a socialism that you're going to be hearing more and more about in the months and years to come. I hope you have found this conversation of interest. The movement in the direction of socialism is underway in the United States in a way it hasn't been for a century, and this time it is going to do better. I look forward to speaking with you again next week.